Good. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. I want to welcome to this week's show Aly Richards. She is the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, getting ready for the August 11th primary. Welcome, Aly.
Thank you so much, Olga. It really is fun to be here with you.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I've been watching your conversations with Amanda Janeau, who is technically your competitor in the primary, but
Mhm.
that certainly hasn't been how most of your conversations have been going.
Yeah, true.
And I have to say, it's been very exciting to hear some rich conversations happening around what's facing Vermont right now.
Yeah. It's been a while since we had deep conversations about that, you know? I think people are hungry for it, and I think that's showing. I mean, yesterday we had our first Vermont public debate, on the radio, and at the end of it, the timekeeper said, "Oh, a civil debate. How novel, how refreshing." So we're very, very proud to just sort of like, yeah, let's have good conversation. Vermont is facing a lot of systemic, serious issues, and
Yeah.
we gotta be digging in.
So, and that kind of brings me to my first question, Allie. As you're going around and you're having these conversations and you're talking with Amanda and you're talking with folks across Vermont, um, in a lot of the conversations you're having, people are asking the big questions. What about healthcare? What about education? What about the economy? Um, but when you look at all those conversations, are there themes emerging for you that you're like, oh, this is what this campaign is actually about?
Yeah, I would say, talking and listening. Honestly, basic stuff, Olga, like relationships. Vermont is such a small place. Everything is relational, especially in a place like Vermont. And it's mostly in contrast to what we've not been seeing in the last 10 years. Everywhere, I've been talking about this a lot. I wasn't going to run for governor because I realized, these are intractable problems. I've been around them a lot. I hadn't been thinking about doing this, and I don't have all the answers. Then I sort of realized, okay, Trump, first of all, he's the only jerk who thinks he has all the answers in his own head. That's a very dangerous way to proceed to lead. But when I started realizing there's so much low-hanging fruit, there's all this untapped potential because people just are not talking to each other. It's amazing what happens when you listen to someone on the ground who actually is living the experience. They see what works, they see what doesn't work. And, that has been honestly a relief to go around Vermont and experience that. Because when you realize sometimes these are just like, how can we possibly get through these problems? And then you say, well, actually, you just do what you do for anything. You problem solve. You roll up your sleeves and you just energetically get in there with the goal, renew the goal, make sure it's the worthy goal with folks involved, and then get them to unlock it with you. So, I mean, I really feel like that's been the biggest exciting and surprising thing because you think, the only way through some of this stuff is pain. I'll give you one example. I had a meeting the other day with some environmental folks and conservation folks, and I thought, we were going to maybe not. I mean, I am very, very pro conservation and protecting our environment, but I wasn't sure what we were going into in this conversation because I've been talking to a lot of other Vermonters saying, there's a balance here. How do we steward our lands properly? How do we center human need here a little bit too, and all these other things? And so we went to this conversation, and it was the best one I've had probably so far. They were saying, actually, no, the way through it is a win-win-win. The best way to keep our forests healthy is to responsibly steward them and work them. And actually, we don't have enough loggers, we don't have enough millers. So if we grew our milling and logging industry, like we've done with diversified agriculture, like diversified forest products, it's actually better for the forest health right now. I talked to like three foresters in the past week about this, and folks who work, in the Forest Parks and Rec department. And it brings jobs back to Vermont, and it stops us from sending the wood up to Canada and then having it be milled and then send it back. So it saves on emissions in the environment, right? So this win-win-win-win. So I think what I'm most surprised at is when you actually get in and talk to people, there's actually these wonderful solutions that increase quality, bring down costs, expand our tax base. They do all these things together. It's amazing.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because, we opened this conversation just a couple minutes ago with you talking about systemic issues, which need systemic solutions. One thing I am curious about, though, is, I think many folks know you as the former executive director of Let's Go Kids
Mhm.
that pu created policy or helped create policy that pulled multiple levers around the childcare system. But one thing that movement had that I wonder if a 2-year cycle as a governor has, and if Vermont has this time, I seem to remember that movement happening over many years.
Yeah.
And so, and that's what you need for systemic change.
Yeah.
However, how are you going to do that in that compressed timeline of 2 years? Not
That's
saying if you're elected, you'll only be elected once, but that's the
right.
certainty you have in that moment.
That is such a great question because it gets to like the root of what I think is really broken in Vermont. We have 2-year election cycles. We have 1-year budgets. We have a legislature that is basically part-time, January through May. They don't barely get paid any, so they're very much almost volunteer in way. They don't have any professional staff. We don't have a planning office. The governor has not used his team as the professional staff for the state of Vermont working with the legislature to dig deep and create any strategic plans. We don't have an economic development plan for the state. We are not doing multi-year planning, which is required for the systemic issues, right? So this is why we are on a hamster wheel. We find ourselves with the highest healthcare premiums in the world. Our property taxes are through the roof, right? We don't have enough houses. So we have these thorny systemic issues and we're like burning money at them, throwing money away, like absolute just how can we keep our head above water? And we're not bending the cost curve. So I think this is a big problem. This is what I hope to bring to this race is what is the vision for Vermont? How do we make sure we all are buying into this together in a way that's durable? And then how can we create this economic action plan that sets multi-year targets, multi-year goals, sets priorities with housing and healthcare being these root causes and understanding what is it going to take to because honestly, Olga, this is the thing. It's a bad situation that it's going to take multiple years to get us out of this. But what is the alternative? What we're doing now is not working. It's driving us to the ground. And so a couple comments on that. So I think that so what we did at Let's Grow Kids, you scaffold short and medium term wins to
Hmm.
show people it's possible, to build the trust, to build the momentum, to get people coming along with you, being part of the solution, sharing their expertise. And then you get the patience to do the longer term challenges. And look, if I'm elected and I only in there for 2 years, which is rare, rare, rare for the state of Vermont,
True.
we have these 2 year well, last us in New Hampshire, last two that have these 2-year budget cycles, right? But usually it's because Vermonters are kind enough to say, all right, we're going to give you a chance in there for a while. But still, if I'm only in there for 2 years, hopefully this economic action plan has set targets and we see enough momentum that it's durable with other partners. And I'm going to make sure we're working with other partners on it. Let me just make one more comment about this.
Hmm.
Let's Grow Kids, right? We weren't in charge. We weren't in charge. So yeah, it took many, many years, including to work with the legislature and the administration to get them to see what we were doing, what the gaps were, what the policies were, and then enact it. So if we were actually in charge, I think we could have cut the time in half at least, marshaling all of the abilities of state government, but also put it in, if I was the governor, I would have just put it in my budget. That's the fastest way to do something.
Hmm. Um, so that, you said a lot of very interesting things. Listeners
Oh,
will
good.
know Olga moments where Olga's brain goes off in 4 million different directions. Um,
Great.
so thank you for everything you just said. I'm trying to prioritize which question I want to ask you
I
next.
love it. As you do it, I want to say one more thing for the Olga brain.
Please.
I was joking with someone yesterday about this. When you make a plan, like it's like I'm running on the least sexy thing anyone's ever run on, having a plan, and you need it to function. The Netherlands has a 500-year plan, and they've reclaimed land from the sea. So it's like don't underestimate the power of a good plan.
I love that. In the Commons office, I'm often like, "What's the action plan? What's the action plan?" And my coworkers are like, "Oh, we'll figure that out." And I get it. And I think this brings me to my next point about planning is a lot of times some of my coworkers they tease me about wanting a plan. And they're not really willing to make one. And it's because for a long time I got all huffy about it. But what I realize is they're so tired that the thought of looking beyond the next deadline, the next crisis, the next whatever is really tough. And so I guess for
Yeah,
you, you know, given that a lot of folks in Vermont are tired right now,
yeah.
how will you, like on a very concrete level, shift the focus and the energy to this new forward-looking,
Mm.
building-looking?
I love it. These are the real, I think, philosophical questions. I actually spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, so I love talking about it. Um, we are paralyzed, right? How paralyzed do we all feel right now? And honestly, what Trump is doing, unprecedented attacks on our democracy, flooding the zone every single minute, day, hour, our 24-hour news cycle, it's designed to paralyze us, Olga. That's the thing. We gotta name it so we can call it. And this is what happens when you are losing democracy. They rely on people having unregulated nervous systems, so we can't put one foot in front of the other. And so
Hmm.
that's a real strategy. So I think it's incumbent on us to say, how can we find our strength? I've always found it looking local, looking in the community, looking at my family. I triage. How am I? How is my family? How's my community? Are we okay? Are we eating? Are we drinking water? Are we helping each other? Right? It's like one foot in front of the other, back to the basics. And we again, I will harken back to this, to my work in childcare, not because I'm only a childcare person. We can talk more about the depth of my experience, but because it's an approach that I believe that was very successful and very eye-opening. We learned a lot of lessons. One of them was setting a deadline is actually very motivating because you
Hmm.
have a mission. I'm a very mission-oriented person. If I have a million things to do, I can't do them. If I know I'm spending my time on the absolute highest purpose that's going to have a big impact, I will put my body on the line. And so it's about motivation. And the thing about Let's Grow Kids was people were pretty paralyzed with like, whoa, we are overwhelmed by the affordability crisis. What can we actually do about it? And a lot of our enemy in that was people not believing we could make a change. And when they realized they were going to be part of something that was bigger than themselves, and it was joyful, it was a joyful movement. Kids were in capes. We got bubbles. We were in parades. We were having rallies. We were having early childhood educators give speeches they'd never publicly spoken before. You know what I'm saying? Like it unlocked something that motivated people, and that's what I think grew the movement. And a personal story to go outside of the childcare. So we had just passed Act 76, this monumental childcare bill. It had taken 8 years, and and COVID and all of these things. And it was just like a marathon sprint. I just like had those like one of those come downs, like, whoa, where am I? What have I just been doing? The adrenaline just like when you hand in your paper and you get the flu, you know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I was ready to just relax and recoup a little bit. And then Montpelier, where I live, flooded. We lost Montpelier in 2023. We
Right.
did not have a capital. And I just like couldn't get out of bed. How is this possible? Like the one moment where I'm going to relax and enjoy my community like how can we do this? So the only way I knew how to proceed was to be the co-chair of the Montpelier Commission on Recovery and Resilience. My husband is like, "What are you doing? You do not have time to do one more thing." But I was like, "I don't have the ability to sit back and not be part of a solution. It's going to flood again. We don't
Hmm.
have a town right now, and it's going to happen again." So if I don't think we are prepared for our citizens and for the resiliency of our built infrastructure, and we're thinking better about all this, like then I won't be able to do anything, you know?
Mm. Hmm. Um, well, that sort of answers one of the questions I want to ask you in a moment. But before I do that, y what for you when you're working with people who are feeling paralyzed, like what's the first step that you take to shift that?
Empathy. I mean, how are you? Why, what do you need? What do you want to share? What do you want me to understand? You know what I mean? I did a core values exercise as I was launching this campaign with an amazing mentor. I will say, Olga, one of the things that I was unprepared for in a good way was the feminine wisdom that would emerge in this race. And I mean, Madeline Kunin to people that were in her cabinet, Gretchen Morse, who was her Agency of Human Services Secretary, these
Mm,
women, they 40 years ago, they set the course and they delivered pillars that we still rely upon in Vermont, like Dr. Dinosaur. And even Howard Dean will say he gets the credit. That was Madeline Kunin,
mhm.
all the way. And so I've been, yeah, just wrapped by this incredibly helpful, motivating feminine wisdom. And, when I say that, you know what I mean, collaborative experience, and existential, right? So it's like you go into a meeting, you think you're going to talk shop, and you start talking about core values because at the end of the day, that's the thing. And so one of these wonderful women led me through a core values exercise, and it's like, here's 50th values, then 20, now get it down to 10, now get it down to 3. It's terrifying. You're losing things that you care about, like integrity and all that. It's like, no, but that's me. So my 3 ended up, and it surprised me a little bit. Joy, empathy, and success. And it surprised me. Now, success is an interesting one. I don't mean for me to be successful. I really like, I don't care about that. I actually think that's something that's given me some power over time is that I'm happy with my family. I'm happy in Montpelier and in this community in Vermont. But when I am endeavoring to do something, I want it to work. Like I
Mm,
want to accomplish it together. I think that was a key thing about Less for Kids. We put a deadline and you said earlier about making a plan. A plan is great, but you got to be agile at the same time because we used to say all the time, are we doing good work? Great. Are we on track to win by 2025? No. Then what are we changing? So it's that mixture of things, but this idea of joy, empathy, and then success, let's actually problem solve to deliver this thing. I think it really encapsulates my approach and also how you talk to a person, how you are in community with a person that really gets you to start moving together.
mm. And how would you translate that to the government system? Because I can imagine to a certain extent one of the things about the Let's Grow Kids movement is that over time people probably self-selected. If they really weren't interested in childcare, they were not part of the coalition, which is fine.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but when you're working with the legislature, you've got people from all over the state with multiple different core values in a very different structure about how things flow and how relationships work. So how will you take what you've learned from your core values from Let's Go Kids and translate that into a new system?
Common ground,
Hmm.
common ground. It's absolutely critical. It's like what you're over here, we're over here. What is the value that we share?
Hmm.
And this is something that when I was in my 20s, I worked in the governor's office and I was sort of the catch-all, the Jill of all trades, doing all policy arenas, being the liaison to all the agencies and departments. And I think it was a very important training ground for running. And so, because I saw what worked and what didn't work, I think that's really important. And so, um, I would, it's funny, the governor made his whole state of the state about education one year. It's very rare to just pick a topic and go all in on that. And after he did that, he turned to me and said, "Oh, well, now we better have a really great education bill. Can you figure that out?" It's like, okay. So this is back to your first question about like what is surprising you when you've seen it there. I brought, you know, the superintendents and the school boards and the NEA and special, education administrators and the Vermont State University, UVM, VSAC, all CCV, all into a room together. They hadn't been in a room together
Hmm.
in years. A lot of their relationships actually had deteriorated to the point of like acrimony.
Hmm.
And so I was here, this 25-year-old, like we can do anything, folks, and get everybody together. And it took a bunch of meetings just to like understand why were people mad at each other. What had gone wrong, what were the sort of like miscommunications, what were the fair issues, and we got into a working relationship, and we had a coalition where we met weekly and we hammered out this massive education bill. And it led to flexible pathways and increasing dual enrollment, early college. It actually paved the way, expanded free and reduced lunch and breakfast programs, which paved the way to universal school meals. It was kind of incredible. And you know, and the folks have told me they don't meet anymore. That was the one and only time that happened, right? So I think it's this idea of we found our common ground. I started every single meeting with, do we remember why we get into fights? I remember, do we remember why we are here? The Vermont student body needs us, you know? So I think that's really important. And by the way, the childcare thing is funny. Yes, people self-selected, but what we did to become successful was show folks why, even if they didn't have young kids, this was an economic development tool that was going to benefit everyone. And that's what I think you have to do is say, tell me what you care about. And
Mhm.
I'll tell you why it relates to this very important thing that's going to require all of our efforts. Housing. Housing is going to increase our tax base. It's going to, reduce our unhoused population. It's going to support older people to age in place. It's going to do all these things. Let's show the world that so we know it's worth the conversation. It's worth the effort. So,
Remind us quickly, one thing people have raised with concerns about you running is you haven't held elected office before, but
true.
you have served in government. So remind us of those experiences.
Yeah. Well, that's what's funny, right? I almost think it's better that we got some fresh faces, some fresh ideas in this moment, right? Because the status quo ain't working. I think someone said to me the other day, a toddler can tell you what's happening now is not working. We just want someone who's gonna fix it. Like, come on, let's go, go, go. And we don't even want to diagnose the problems anymore. We don't want big fancy ideas. Like, let's deliver here. And so, yeah, I think my experience is sort of interesting because I really understand the job from the inside and the outside, even though I have not held elected office. So I do think I can hit the ground running on day one, right? First of all, Howard Dean, when he was the governor, appointed me to the State Board of Education when I was 15 years old as a student member. So
Hmm.
I have sort of like, deep roots as a public servant, which was amazing. They had just changed the law. I was the third ever student on that board, and it was very eye-opening in a lot of ways. By the way, aspirational representation, right? I sat at a table. I grew a voice, a confidence that I had something to offer. That matters, right? In lots of different dimensions. But then I worked for Barack Obama's first presidential campaign. So it's from the politics side and seeing sort of how, again, things work and they don't work. The dysfunction in Washington was present even then,
Hmm.
20 years ago. And it was heartbreaking. And, politics over country. Unbelievable. And Citizens United was on its way. And we all knew what was going to happen there, Olga, the seed of destruction for our democracy. And it has borne out 100% as everyone worried it would.
Hmm.
Um, and then I worked for Peter Shulman, and I was there for 5 years. I started as a special like policy assistant, and I ended up as a deputy chief of staff. And I was right in the middle of the Irene flood recovery. I think that's a pretty big distinction. I mean, that's where he said, folks, you don't get to determine what defines you as an elected official.
Hmm.
And Irene is our defining moment. The clock is ticking as of this moment, as the waters are rising, and we will all be judged. And I want you all to be on the ground helping communities, and the entire administration activated in a really incredible way. And we really had, we saw the best of Vermont in teamwork and community, across communities. It was what we saw was on the ground, people potlucking in Rochester because they literally were cut off from the rest of the world. So, and then, compare that to 2023, 2024, when the state government was nowhere to be found. That's why all these local efforts, including mine, rose up because the state wasn't even giving guidance. I mean, we were mucking out in Montpelier, toxic waste we didn't even know. And
Hmm.
there were high schoolers getting violently ill. Okay. And the health department wasn't like allowed to come and tell us what to do. And weeks later, they're like, oh, no, 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 you shouldn't touch that. You shouldn't be touching that stuff. There's a different protocol. That is not leadership. You are defined by that moment. And so that's a big contrast for me and a real reason I want to run. And anyway, and then obviously I ran Let's for Kids. And so again, for 10 years, we worked from the outside in. I mean, we helped the legislature pass one of the most effective bills there is. And you can't expect to get anything done without passing through the legislature. That is our democratic process. So
Hmm.
that's sort of like I have the inside and outside knowledge. I know where the levers are so we can pull them, so we can transform that system. The last thing I just want to say on this, because it's a great question and it's critical. And voters deserve to know, right?
Hmm.
Like, do I have what it takes? When COVID hit, the Secretary of Agency of Human Services, Mike Smith under Phil Scott, sort of like had this like middle of the night eureka moment where he's like, oh no, the childcare industry is going to go bankrupt. We're closing our schools tomorrow, but what are we doing with 0 to 5? We don't have a system, it's not publicly funded. So what do we do? And he called me. Like I mean, so we were the trusted entity because we had the relationships on the ground and a track record, of being an honest broker. And so we stopped everything that we were doing when COVID hit. And overnight, we became like a odd quasi agency of state government. And we just helped support the childcare system through the pandemic. We literally like helped them shut down responsibly because no one was even going to say you should shut down like schools did. Help them reopen a couple safely for essential workers. We married essential workers' children to critical childcare programs that were going to open. We created supply chains. We literally had
Hmm.
people tearing up pallets of masks and toilet paper and hand sanitizer and thermometers and getting them to these childcare programs. So we sort of like shifted overnight to an emergency responder quasi, agency of the government working hand in glove with this administration. So just shows like you need a governor that's ready in any condition, including an emergency.
Hmm. We have only a couple minutes left in this first half, but I do want to touch on something you said, Allie, about the state not being there. You're not the first person I've heard that from. And I think when you mean state, you mean, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm putting words in your mouth. I
Yeah,
think you mean the Scott administration. Um, so is that what you're saying, that there have been
yes,
times the Scott administration has not shown
correct.
up for and
Yes, that's what I mean. The Scott administration, they're the boss right now. Um, when we had floods in central Vermont, especially, I mean, and they were also in the Northeast Kingdom, I mean, we had devastating floods in 2003, 2004, and actually even for Lindenville and places like that, 2005, 3 years in a row, almost to the date. The first 2 years were literally on the anniversary. So talk about like trauma and being paralyzed and not no knowing, can we actually like rebuild? Can we actually move forward here? Um, this is where everyone should activate, starting with your leader. On the ground, how can I help? How can we collaborate? And I know this is harsh, and there are a lot of state employees that want to help, that can help, that would like to help. But it's ultimately the governor's job to say, this is how we're showing up in this emergency. I need you out there. I need you hand in hand with local municipal folks, and ask anyone in Montpelier, in Barry, in Plainfield. Not only was there no support right away, like from here's how you guys should be doing this, here's guidance, here's how we're going to help you. But there was actually a lot of confusion and miscommunication, and didn't get back for days on answers to important things. And so I just have to contrast it because I saw the two different approaches, and
you
you
mean 2011 Irene and
yes,
okay.
exactly. It requires the administration to realize in an emergency, all eyes on them, and you got to rise to the occasion.
Hmm. And were you ever given any explanation about why there wasn't that communication or that leadership that you were hoping for?
In some cases, it seemed like they didn't want to take on the liability, like to
Hmm.
say, here's the guidance about what to do and what not to do, with the toxic sludge that came from your wastewater. Honestly, that's what it seemed like. But I think it's more of just a trend. Like, this is not an sort of 1 foot forward, energetic administration. That's what we've seen. It's been a very much like, I mean, the governor has said this himself. I'm going to sit here and I have my priorities, protect the vulnerable, grow the economy, whatever. And I'm going to just look at everything that comes my way and judge them on this lens and say yes or no. And that's his MO. I'm sorry, you're in charge. You need to be making the plan. You don't need to be sitting back as a lens to things that come your way. And I think that everyone in Vermont actually understands what I just said. You
Hmm.
know, when you're blaming, you're not leading. He's vetoed almost 70, over 70 times, most in history. His political strategy has been diagnose the problem perfectly, don't offer a solution, don't activate the resources of state government towards specific goals, and like an energetic, how do we get to yes? How do we collaborate across agencies with communities? And then when the legislature can't get us out of these multi-year systemic issues that we started the conversation with, he blames them.
Hmm.
Guess what? You can get elected over and over and over again with that strategy. I don't know who wins because the
Hmm.
Vermonters are seeing no change. In fact, what we're seeing in the last 10 years is no houses, higher costs, highest costs of healthcare. This has happened in the last 10 years. All the hospitals on the verge of bankruptcy, confusion in the education space where there's no goal, there's no value driving the conversation. So that's chaos.
Well, thank you, Aly Richards. We are out of time. So, listeners, we're going to hear from some underwriters here on WVEW, LP Brattleboro, and then Aly Richards and I will be back in a moment.
Great.
Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. If you're just joining us, I'm your host and producer, Olga Peters, and I'm speaking with Democratic Gubernatorial Candidate Aly Richards. So glad you're here, Aly.
Thanks,
Uh,
Olga.
Before we dive back into the conversation, of course, housekeeping. Thank you, BCTV, for taking the video version of this show and sharing it with media centers around Vermont, as well as reminding folks that the views and opinions of everyone on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the hosts and the guests, and no one else. Just we'll leave it there.
Love it. So
Love it.
true.
So, Aly, I would love to hear about that moment where, because it sounds like at first you were not really running for governor was not necessarily on your 5-year plan. And then now it is. So I would love to hear about that moment where you're like, I'm doing this, and this is why.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question. It was funny. I put, people over time have said you should really consider this, oh, the Let's for Kids thing is a good, experience for this. And so, oh, maybe one day, I don't know. And then it was not in my mind at all wrapping up Let's for Kids. We put ourselves out of business at the end of last year. And I took the month of November off. It has no in the name. My husband, reminded me, just say no to everything. You can do this. You can have a month. And it was like, I needed it.
Mhm.
It was fantastic. I read books again for fun, fiction, you know, fantasy. Turns out I was behind. Everyone, my neighbors of all ages were like, "Where have you been, girl? You even read Fourth Wing?" I was like, "No,"
Nope.
but I was like going to yoga. I was, landscaping. I spent more time unkempt in public than I was expecting. I would go to a yoga class unshowered, and then I'd be like, "Well, I want to go read the newspaper and have a tea," and then I would just go to the local coffee shop and sit in a comfy chair, like unshowered for hours. And anyway, it was lovely. I blame it a little bit with my decision here because it like re-elasticized my brain. I was very open, I was very vulnerable, and after 10 years of really like head down marathon. And so I was starting my new life. I was starting to write a book, about Let's Grow Kids, about sort of why early child education is this amazing tool that we should be thinking about for rebuilding this country, all this stuff. And
Mhm.
then minding my own business. And then basically it looked like, political wisdom was starting to show that the governor was going to run one more time, which was somewhat unexpected, and that no one really was going to challenge him.
Mhm.
And and then I went into the legislature one day actually for, supporting the new executive director of Let's Kids Action Network, our 501(c)(4, very small organization that sort of is keeping the lights on to make sure that, all the work we did is protected within an ecosystem. And all these people came up to me, all sorts of people, legislators, other folks, like just citizens that were walking through saying, "You got to run for governor." And I was so blindsided. I was like, no, 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 not what we're doing here. And then But I sort of like started thinking, oh no, like, do I need to do this? So then, Olga, I will tell you, the governor gave his budget address at the end of January, and he no energy, no ideas, just diagnosed all the problems and kind of wagged his finger at us. It made me feel bad. I actually had to stop listening to it and I had to read it because I was like feeling so bad. Like, oh no, everything in Vermont is terrible and I haven't been doing enough, like how have I failed? And then I was like, wait a minute, like you're in charge. Where's the energy? Where are the ideas? And where's the mention of childcare? He didn't even mention childcare. It was the same day, as this like thing that we are doing in Vermont that is amazing, that should be like bringing energy. The same day, the New York Times came to Vermont and interviewed me, Bill Stritzler, the head of Smuggler's Notch, a bunch of parents, a bunch of early childhood educators. And the prompt, Olga, was that in their New York Times office, they said affordability. It's going to make or break this election nationally.
Hmm.
Who's actually done something in this country to make life more affordable for people? And their answer to that question was childcare in Vermont, because it's financial relief, like deep financial relief for thousands and thousands of working families in Vermont. And so here's this thing being celebrated nationally, celebrated as a model for others to emulate. The day he gives his address and doesn't even mention it, I went home that night and I said to my husband, honey, uh-oh, we got to run for governor, you know? And it was one of those things where as soon as I gave myself permission to think about it, everything just sort of like stretched out in front of me. Like, wait a
Hmm.
minute. I'm excited when I think about this. I know who to tap for the team. I know who I would put in my cabinet. Like, right. The first thing I did was start thinking about my cabinet, not even like the campaign. And it just felt like green lights, all the way. And I did not know at the time actually that Amanda was considering it as well. And when we both found out that we were running, we got coffee before we launched, and we actually liked each other immediately and said, look, let's have a friendly primary. It's good for democracy. It's good for a reasonable debate. Let's model this because we don't see this around the country very often.
Yes. Well, soapbox moment for all listeners. Um, I we often forget about primaries, but I feel that's where, as voters, we have the most choice because it's
Mhm.
kind of where we have the most where we have the most power because it's where we have the most choice. And so I think it's very exciting to have a competitive primary
Me
for
too.
governor for on the Dem ticket. Um,
Well, can I just put my finger on that? Look,
sure.
nobody's paying attention because it's a primary and it's the middle of the summer and it's August 11th. I don't think even people know we have an election. And so imagine how few people would be paying attention if we didn't have two people actually, sparking some interest. So I think it's very, very healthy.
Yeah. Yes, and it is, we will say, folks, August 11th because Allie and I were chatting before the show started, and I was like, "Remind me when it is," because when I checked the internet, it gave me three dates.
Even worse. Come on, internet.
Yes, August 11th.
And can
Um,
I have one more PSA? Look, you can vote now. That's the beauty. Like it's
mhm,
getting a little late with the post office to do your ballot by mail, but you can go to your local municipal office and your city clerk, your town clerk, and you can ask for the ballot right there. They'll give it to you. You can just do it and hand it right back.
mhm. Yes, thank you. That is a good reminder. Which reminds me, under the very unscientific heading of people who happen to have called me and asked me this question. Um, I have been hearing from folks in my life who are considering voting early. They're looking at their ballot and they're like, okay, there's this Aly Richards, there's this Amanda Janeau, and there's Governor Scott. And what I find so interesting when they ask me questions about, you're following this, you must be smarter than me. And I say, probably not, but I'll do my best. Um, they're not really necessarily excited about Scott,
Mhm.
but life feels so tenuous right now
Yeah.
in Vermont, especially with the economy and
Hmm.
many of the social issues that we're working through. Um, that there is this sense of, well, at least he's the devil we know.
Mm.
And, this Aly Richards, this Amanda Janeau, they might come in with these crazy expensive ideas and just make things worse.
Yeah.
And whether that is a factually accurate statement or not, it is a very definite, emotional, true statement for a lot of people.
Sure.
So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. I mean, this is the type this is what we need to be talking about. You know, the devil you know is a funny thing. The devil you know who has overseen the largest decline, in our economy, the highest raising of costs, especially in healthcare, Um, and so this is how I've been getting traction on this, Olga. First of all, I'm running with respect, truthfully. I'm pushing back on him in this conversation, and I will. I think it's healthy to have a real dialogue. And we haven't had one in 10 years. No one's pushed back at all. So we don't really know, like, what's happening, what should we understand, who's actually helping narrate the stuff. So I actually think having a reasonable policy debate, again, not just in the primary, but with Phil Scott is very important. But ultimately, thank you for your service. He's been here for 10 years. And he got us through COVID. I mean, I do think that should be a basic expectation of your leader, but still, he did do that well. And, and we all did it well together. And he showed political courage in a couple key areas, some that were important to me, reproductive freedom. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And also, he signed a pretty impressive gun law, especially coming from where he had been sitting for many years. And he was a no to Trump, right? So here's things that I think this is why I feel people say, especially Democrats, okay, he's this like moderate Republican, and it's nice to have a divided government. I hear this a lot.
Mhm.
Um, for me, I say
Diversity
thank you
is a
for your
strength when it comes to political thought. I feel. Yes.
yes, yes. So okay, thank you for your service. Um, we don't have term limits in Vermont, but we have common sense. If you literally cannot afford to live here, isn't it time for a new approach? Because the truth is, what will be so magical in these next 2 years that we were not able to see in the last 10? That's the thing that I think resonates the most I've heard from people. Because again, he's been a goalie swatting things away. We've talked about this in a couple different ways already. That is not an energetic strategic offense, rolling up your sleeves and tackling these multi-year systemic issues, working with the legislature. I've never seen anything like this before. His agency, folks, secretaries and commissioners do not work with the chairs of their relevant committees.
I have heard
That's
that.
not a good strategy. I'm sorry. Like, you need to marshal the efforts of every branch of government together to solve these issues. Find where your disagreements are, find where the compromise is possible. And if you can't, the last resort is the veto. The veto is not the strategy. It's a last resort. But this is what I would say to folks. So, right, time for a new approach. The vacuum of leadership from the executive branch is what is causing, I think, a lot of the cost overruns. It's not
Mhm.
the legislature, it's the lack of the legislature having a plan from the person who has the staff year round. Here's one example: the motel program. Okay, every year he ran in and berated the legislature, and he has the biggest bully pulpit. So he's the loudest voice.
Yep.
And he says, "You're throwing money away. This is a band-aid. It costs so much money." And they said, okay, but it's also a matter of humanity. Where are these children going to go? Where are these Vermonters, some with disabilities going to go? Where are these veterans going to go? And he said, well, we need, more of a permanent fix. Great, Governor. You're the one with the staff. You're the one with the ability to figure this out and create a plan. Then you give it to us. We'll work on the plan. We'll tweak it. We'll hold you accountable. We'll do oversight. We'll do feedback with our communities. But that's how that balance works, And he never, ever, ever came with an off ramp, never with a plan. So this is what I mean. So I feel like when people say, oh, W, no, 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 no. It hasn't been working. He has not been using the office in the way you must. And so then the value proposition is, well, what about Allie? Is she going to come in there and do crazy stuff? No, no. I've been around the block in Vermont. I understand what a delicate balance it is here. I too will use the veto when and if a plan is contradicting the vision, the economic action plan. But we need to at least have some stability to know where are we going. And then if a legislature does something that moves us in the wrong direction, or we're doing too many things at once, which is a huge problem in Vermont, then that's where the governor is the ballast, right? And I think my track record really, really shows that we did a really like tough and hard and transformational thing in childcare, and it is working, and we are measuring it. So we're the first to know if it's not working, and if it's not
Mhm.
working, we will make a course correction.
And we've talked a lot about affordability and the kind of the chicken and egg of a lot of our systems. Um, I find Vermont's in an interesting point in its life, as much as I've seen of it anyways. Um, uh, where we are in this chicken and egg, like for example, to strengthen our economy, we need better wages, but to have better wages, we need a stronger economy. Those sorts of circular problems. Um, and then we also talk about affordability a lot. So I'm curious for you, if Vermont has reached a point of affordability, how would you define that and what markers would you say, okay, if we have this, then it makes life affordable?
Oh, what a cool. These are, thank you for these great questions. This is refreshing. Um, Look, it's simple. Like if I could boil down, someone forced me to boil down like my whole reason for running my vision, it's Vermonters can afford to live here in their homes and communities that they love and take a vacation sometimes. You know what I mean? Like to me, it's just like go to like what does it actually look like? And people aren't even asking for that much, Olga. That's the thing. I've been on the ground talking to Vermonters for over 15 years in my professional career, and before that, when I was a kid, even. And they just want to be left alone, do their thing in their communities with their families, be able to make ends meet, stay in the place that they love, having access to a good paying job. And so it's basic stuff, and we deserve to deliver it. We've got, come on, who makes the rules? Capitalism, because we can change it. We can change the rules so that we can deliver this in Vermont. And so for me, that's the basic thing. But what does that look like, on an economic action plan? It looks like regional housing targets of how many units we are bringing online, and that's building. It's also rehabbing. It's also subdividing old houses. It's infilling. It's home share. It's everything,
Mhm.
everything kitchen sink strategy, because this is so important. It's also our tax base, demonstrating that we've built our tax base up to a point where we have enough revenue to reinvest in Vermont to start doing the things that make us great and move us into the growth cycle, like paid family medical leave. If we start growing our tax base, then we'll have some revenue to actually say, what are the things we really need here? And then we can invest in those things. But it's about priority. If you do everything at once, you break the system. And
Mm,
so we had 5,000 people net gain during COVID. And that fundamentally changed our tax base. Just 5,000 people, it changed our tax revenue. The problem is they didn't stay. And by the way, doesn't make us New Jersey. I don't think anybody felt those extra 5,000 people here,
no.
right? So just imagine. So it's growing our tax base, growing our revenue base. So it spreads out among more people, which brings our property taxes down, brings our healthcare premiums down, brings our income taxes down. And then it's median wages
Hmm.
going up, at least keeping pace with the costs that are coming at us, which that's the big divide.
Yeah.
Median wages here, cost increases are here.
Yeah. Yeah. What I also wonder sometimes too with our economy, thank you for that, Ally, and thank you for, I have to admit, just me on my soapbox, I'm tired when folks say things like, well, it's all about taxes in Vermont. And I'm like, no, actually, if you look at a job in Vermont and a job in right over the line in New Hampshire, right over the line, so I'm on Southern Vermont, right over the line in Massachusetts,
Yeah,
same job. New Hampshire and Massachusetts, they're paying more,
yeah.
and I do worry sometimes, and I don't know if you see this, that one of Vermont's strengths or Vermonters' strengths is that we are very good at doing a lot with a very little. Unfortunately, I think we have gotten used to that because it was a necessity, because we're
Mm,
working with very little. And unfortunately, it feels a little bit like that willingness to do a lot with a little may be part of what's, I don't know, I guess settling,
hmm
um, might be part of
hmm
what's happening here.
Hmm.
What do you think?
Really, really interesting. I see a lot about this idea of right scarcity mindset, instead of abundance mindset. And that's what again, I feel like we cut through that. It's like you can't tax and spend.
Hmm.
You can't cut our way out of this. You have to grow our way out of this. And so in Less for Kids, it was an interesting thing. The business community was not just passerby on this. They were leading this, which is really interesting because ultimately what we examined and discovered, and now the rest of the country is starting to really perk up because we helped show this, is that childcare is a broken business model. Early child educators cannot afford to make any less. Before we started this work, $15 an hour without benefits, doing the most important job, arguably, in the society, supporting our next generation. And parents cannot afford to pay more because they're the only payer and they pay more than they can afford, and it's not enough to run the business. So it's a bankrupting business model. It's very simple, but took a while for people to really understand that. So the business community came in because they understood that, and they understood the workforce development element of this, the economic development, and honestly, the general return on investment. Their value proposition was we make investments in our businesses to grow
Mhm.
all the time. It's how this works. Even in an economic downturn, we're just asking the state of Vermont to do the same darn thing. So let's understand that this sort of get a coalition of folks saying what's the smartest possible revenue to make an upfront investment that will pay dividends over a lifetime in human capital and in capital. Like really, we are this. Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen talk about investments in childcare as one of the best returns you could ever imagine, right? It's over a lifetime and it's immediate. And we've really started to see that in Vermont. It's growing jobs, it's opening businesses. There's like secondary things there where you're having food services and janitorial services, right? Like, so it's like this is the example of don't settle, find your way through. Like it's entrepreneurial spirit, kind of, you know what I mean? There's a third way, very likely. We started with this conversation. What's the
Mhm.
third way? And there's an investment to grow. So we can do that. We've seen it possible. We sort of have to open up our Overton window of what's possible and show it. But I love the question because, you know, no, we can't settle. And the last thing I just want to say is I don't know if you have felt this, but it's very resonant with me. Vermont is program rich and systems poor. So
Hmm.
because we are in this moment, like I think you said, of scarcity,
Interesting.
we're
Yeah.
throwing a million things at it. That is not efficient. If you tighten that up through some systems work, you know, you save money and you increase the quality. It's kind of like the idea of shared services, which we did in
Hmm.
childcare, which we're looking at in K through 12. That doesn't gore anybody's sacred ox. You know what I mean? Like shared services, you're just putting economies of scale over these micro units over local control. It's all good. So anyway, I just think there are ways that we can unlock this when we sort of inject technical assistance and systems in at the right time, and you save money and it increases quality and access.
Well, thank you for that program rich systems poor. I will be thinking about that for the rest of the day, Allie. Um, but it brings me to two interesting t tensions, and we'll start with a philosophical one. Often when I hear the people having the conversation around this came up in Act 181
Mm.
conversations at select boards quite often I was covering. There would be one person saying, I can't make it here, right? I'm hanging on to Vermont by my fingernails, I think was one quote I heard. To which other folks will say, yeah, but we have such a great quality of life here, and I'm willing to sacrifice certain things for that quality of life.
Mm.
I'm starting to
Mm.
kind of chafe at that those two poles. And I think we would probably serve ourselves better if we could find the third way or the balance point between those two poles.
Oh, yes.
Thoughts? Discuss.
Oh, yeah. Discuss. Yes. Holy moly. Oh, gosh. I mean, this is something that we were, thinking about in the break too. I have noticed so much us versus them
Hmm.
in this campaign. Chittenden County versus rural, rich versus poor, business versus like I don't even know what the other piece of that is, citizen, I guess. We've really started vilifying in this weird way. I've seen our business community, even though the vast majority of our businesses are like 15 employees or less, and they're making jobs and they're just Vermonters like you and me trying to create economic opportunity for others who can actually then be here and make ends meet. So I just gotta say, what has occurred to me is there's no us versus them here, folks. It's just us here. 645,000 people. It's just us. We got to figure this out. By the way, 645,000 people, it's a glorified town in most places.
Really is.
So why can't we figure this out? A $9 billion budget,
Hmm.
645,000 people. So Yeah, I'm with you all the way. This idea though of, oh, we have a great quality of life here. It's like, well, who you asking about that?
Hmm.
Like, don't assume, that everybody's okay. Because you're not, I was door knocking in Wilder, just this week right up the river from you. And I had the most just emotional and human conversation. It's pretty amazing. You're knocking on someone's door, they're in their home, and you're actually like seeing people and they're talking to you. And this one woman has this beautiful small business that she's right out of her car. She doesn't even have a storefront yet, ravioli business.
Oh,
And
fun.
she's just amazing, right? We want her to be here. We want this business to thrive. And she literally was like, "Yeah, I'm hanging on by my fingertips. All of my neighbors have been priced out. These are empty houses because they couldn't afford to live here anymore, and I'm next." Oh, no, we can't accept that. We cannot accept that. We will not have a state. We will not have a state. And and gosh, it's just, yeah, talking to folks like this and their own terms on their porches, um, it's real. So it's like we have to balance, our humans here and just don't assume everybody's okay. That's just going to further polarize and honestly create generational divides in wealth and opportunity.
And what about this tension I often hear, especially with policy, this tension between local control
Mhm.
and state control? I'm not just talking the Dillon's rule issues,
Yeah,
but we really pride ourselves on local control in Vermont. And yet, given our small population and how dispersed we can be, despite being a small state, there are economies of scale, that can
yeah,
be found at the state level.
yeah,
And yet I don't know that they always jive well together. Um, I actually think some of our conversations around school consolidation
yeah.
is highlighting these two approaches. Um, what do you think is the solution there?
This is the crux to almost everything, Olga, in Vermont. So to me, I do agree. The community understands their needs best. I mean, that's real. And by the way, one of the things we did in our local flood resiliency work after our flood I was talking about was called the Montpelier Neighbor Net. It is one of the
Mm,
things that warms my heart the most. Like, look, this is going to happen again any minute now. It could be a flood, it could be ice, it could be heat. Are we going to be ready? And it's like, let's go to the most hyper local level back to like, what can we do? And we basically divided, had folks self-divide Montpelier up into neighborhoods. Where do you consider your neighborhood? And I live on a cul-de-sac, and we are a very clear neighborhood. We have potlucks already, like we do block parties. We had one of our neighbors was 101 years old when she passed away, and we had these birthday parties for her. That was like my kids would be like, "It's Lois's birthday party, let's go," And so the idea is like, who's the captain of your neighbor net? And next time there's an emergency, do they know what's happening? Do they have what they need? Do they have the generator? Does she have the water? Who needs a shop vac, right? And
mhm,
so, yeah, it's just this idea of hyper local is real.
mhm,
And to me, the answer is surprise, the third way. There, to me, it's partnership. It's technical assistance. It is not like it's not forced mergers from a room with the door closed with three people. This is the thing about like the education lens of this. We have a pretty fragile education system. So
mhm,
in Montpelier, if you kick it, it breaks. You know
mhm.
what I mean? And if you've seen one school district, you've seen one school district. They do not mix and match.
Yeah.
So, this is the thing though. This is the beautiful thing. Vermont is not so big that you cannot understand what is going on. If you actually are doing the work, here's all of our communities. They all have unique needs. They all have their own ideas about what's best for them. So in a partnership with the state, through technical assistance, grants, support, economies of scale, you can do both things. We've seen it happen in many cases. And here's the thing, back to that idea of systems, we have the chip. This is a new thing. Here's how we can build more housing, unlock development. It's trying to take what was this big, complicated TIF model that worked in big towns and make it sort of so smaller folks can, use it. And no one's used it yet. People don't really know how to use it. It's complicated. The technical assistance was a one-page glossy from League of Cities and Towns. Not good enough. Like,
Mhm.
I want a real energetic state government where we're saying culture of accountability, getting to yes, we're building houses. So look, all the regional development corporations, they're already on the ground. They know their folks, the regional planning corporations. the AAA agencies, the United Ways, they're there.
Hmm.
So who's the best at navigating the chip model? Become the captain. Tell all your peers in every community, with your association, how to do it. Train the trainer, and then be on the ground. All like the state can give you money to say, be the technical assistance arm to unlock this complicated program for any municipality who wants it. Do you know what I mean? So it's that partnership that I think we are lacking. And it's not a pipe dream because we don't have so many towns and districts that you could not, with focus, actually understand who's who, what's what, and what do we all need here.
So we are just about out of time, but I have one question um, that is actually a holdover from the debate you had with Amanda Janeau yesterday
Okay,
on Vermont Public, which I will link to the in the show notes, folks, because
great.
it was a really great conversation. But it was about working with the federal government in the
Yeah.
time of Trump and the amount of federal funding we get from the federal government. This is what my takeaway from that conversation was. Amanda raised a concern that, if I heard her correctly, sounded like she was worried such a large part of our state budget comes from the federal government. And perhaps we need to lower that amount for our own resiliency. You brought up the interesting point of, yeah, but we pay into the federal system,
That's what I'm doing.
so we deserve our share back. And that you were willing, if you become governor, to fight for that.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think those two points are mutually exclusive.
Mhm.
And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, are there places where we could increase our financial resilience if we depended less on the federal government? And, what should we fight for?
Great question. And this is a bit of a distinction, I would say, if people are looking for them in the primary, because again, we share a lot of the same values, we have a lot of the same ideas. We even both grew up on a dirt road in Orange County, right? We both have dogs named after political figures, historic figures. So, okay, there's some similarities there, but so this is an important one. To me, $3 billion, a third of our state budget, and it's a third of our state budget. We only have 645,000 people here.
Hmm.
It's healthcare, it's housing, it's like support for low-income Vermonters to heat their homes. It's
Hmm.
Medicaid, it's disaster relief. There is literally no way that we could uh, recoup that money from Vermonters alone. We do not have the base. We do not. It's the unfortunate situation of what we're doing here. Now, does that mean we should not be resilient? Oh, of course we should be resilient. One of my favorite things that I've been a vocal supporter of and watched it happen and singing it from the rooftops is universal school meals. Part of the reason I love that is because it's like a fixed economy. We're growing local food. We're
Hmm.
keeping those jobs open. We're keeping those farms open because they have stable contracts with our schools and our hospitals. So it's a win-win-win-win-win. People are eating local foods. We're keeping the jobs. Kids are happy and healthy and thriving, and we're actually creating talk about a system. This is ironic. We're creating efficiencies because we're doing the universal program and we're serving sort of more food for less, which is the beauty. And it's a fixed economy. So if something happens, we're more resilient, so taking care of ourselves 100%. We know how to do it. We've done it before. Anything like that we should be doing. And this is why I'm excited to collaborate with Amanda. I would put her in charge, if I win, of the circular economy in Vermont. I love it. But we are miles away from doing that in a way that we could be resilient against losing federal funding.
Hmm.
And she mentioned, well, we could withhold our federal taxes. Some people are thinking about this. Ooh, ooh, ooh. There are things that we can't do. You know what I mean? Constitutionally, and also that's basically like seceding from the union. And so to me, we need someone who's going to fight Donald Trump. We need someone who's going to fight for Vermonters. 100%. I'm your fighter. I am your fighter. But these are monies, like you said, that we were owed. And to me, this is part of the fight. And it is really gambling with Vermonters' lives if we think, we can really sort of start, surviving without that federal dependency. And we've got good fighters here. Charity Clark, right? To me, one of the best in this country, as far as our attorney general, who's taken on this administration and winning and winning.
Hmm.
And I want her to have a partner in the governor's office.
Thank you. We are out of time, but it has been wonderful to talk with you, Allie. What do you want to leave listeners with?
Just thank you for listening. I mean, look, engagement is how we're going to rebuild our democracy. It's critically important. Vermont is a special place. I love that we can sort of have a debate, disagree, and get a beer at the end of the day, get pizza at the end of the day. Thank you for listening, engaging in this primary. You've got good options. And if you think, things aren't going well in Vermont, let's think a little deeper and push ourselves on this and see, is it time for something new?
Thank you. And if people want to find out more about you,
Alyforvt.com, ALYFORVT.com.
thank you very much. Gubernatorial candidate Aly Richards, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Olga. Really a pleasure to speak with you as well.
The Montpelier Happy Hour is on WVEW every Friday at 2 p.m., rebroadcasted on Wednesday mornings, and of course, wherever you find your podcasts. Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.